All right, guys, I'm here with Norm Kurland. We're doing the Just Third Way Hour podcast for the second time around. It's Wednesday, so you can expect these to come out every Wednesday again. We're going to be trying to set around the same time, around 10 a.m. So last week we got to know Norm a little and what he's doing here at CESJ, the Center of Economics and Social Justice. How they're teaching a lot about justice-based management, as well as ESOPs and employee stock ownership plans. How this is going to impact the future businesses as well as growth of the economy. Norm shared a lot about how politics and economics are actually very well connected. How if we really want a just political system, we want good leaders, good government, a lot of times that actually does begin with economics. We need to create a just way where everyone's able to have equal access to ownership when it comes to companies. And that doesn't mean taking money from or ownership in companies from the rich and just distributing it out. We need to make a fair way so that people that are creating businesses that have a lot of capital at the same time are getting benefited as well, but that everyone that is working hard can be really incentivized for their worth. We want to create a way in which hard work really receives more benefits today. A lot of times people are locked into, you probably remember the phrase that Norm used last week, how a lot of people are wage slaves. They work the 9-to-5 jobs, but at the end of the day, it's really hard today to be able to provide for their families, and a lot of times you have to go above and beyond. Maybe start up a company outside of your work or do some sort of side gig. Maybe use your entrepreneurial skills outside. And a lot of times, if that becomes really successful, then you end up ditching your 9-to-5 job. But what we're trying to do is there should be a better way where people aren't as reliable on government, because in the end, people should have the final say. All the power shouldn't be just in the government, and then we just become really reliant on them. What should happen is people should be able to work hard, and government should be able to help, but what our hard work shouldn't be just, not be able to get the whole job done. And so the first thing I'm going to ask Norm today is, it's kind of a recap question, but it's, what is capital homesteading, Norm? I think that's something that it's a pretty good concept we kind of want to review with you guys. What is capital homesteading?
Yeah, this is a term that was used in a piece of legislation that President Lincoln signed during the Civil War. It was called the Homestead Act. And there you had many of the millennial will be attending public sector or state schools, state universities. Many of those state universities were started under under the Homestead Act. It was a way of subsidizing universities, but it was basically a very interesting tactic that Lincoln developed in order to win the Civil War, which was a war that devastated. It was the most devastating war that Americans ever fought among themselves. And the question was, first we have to understand what Lincoln was doing. You had slavery, and Lincoln, his position was not to extend slavery into the new states west of the Mississippi, because these were acquired in purchases from from Mexico to expand the land to be governed by America, and basically what Lincoln was trying to do, because he was against slavery, but that was not the key. The key question that caused the war was that you had the South wanted to expand the rights to engage in slavery west of the Mississippi. And so what Lincoln did in the Homestead Act was to say that to encourage propertyless people from east of the Mississippi to go and farm west of the Mississippi. They would be given 160 acres of land to farm, and if they farmed it for 5 years, they were given title, full title. So it was free. But the home, as we all understand, is just that land, natural resource. These are finite resources. So that when it was no longer possible to provide homestead stakes, and that's where the word homestead comes from, it was no longer possible to provide homestead stakes. But at the same time, the interesting thing is this is a time that America's industrial revolution started taking place. Lincoln was very familiar with the railroads and manufacturing was beginning. And because of the Homestead Act and the fact that the farmers, you had larger families, but they were able to be so incentivized that America in agriculture suddenly skyrocketed in terms of other nations who had comparable climatic and soil conditions, but America's agriculture took off. Same time as the Industrial Revolution. Now, we use the term capital homesteading to talk about a frontier that's unlimited. Nobody knows what the capital frontier, and by capital we're talking about it would include land, the use of land and natural resource, but more than that, the unlimited frontier is in our technologies, and that of course is taking a root, is occurring at an exponential rate. So we have now robots that are displacing the people who left the farms, went into industry, but instead of owning the industry or having shares of ownership in the railroads and manufacturing companies from the Civil War on, no, instead it became more and more concentrated, the ownership of industry, so that today in the world, those who can control who is going to own can leave out 99% of humanity, which if we really are committed to justice, by that treating everyone as equally important, every life is equally important, from the child who's born, every woman, every man, and treating them as having fundamental human rights. The right to be an owner is a fundamental human right. We don't want to, you have two choices under today's world, and that is, under capitalism, you have that tiny fraction of humanity who own more than the bottom 95% plus of humanity. A few people, as a matter of fact, if you control money, which is a key to what we'll be talking about under capital homesteading, you can control who's going to own in the future, who's going to be in there, whether most people who do have a share are really buying pieces of paper that are part of a gambling casino, and therefore, and often don't have the full rights of ownership. Even shareholders. Many shareholders don't have voting power, and they have no right to the profits. This is important because it's a violation of something that the law provided for thousands of years, that if you have property, you have two things. You have control, and if you have property together with others, you're sharing in that control. So you're sharing in power. The other right under private property, as defined by the law, most people are not taught what private property is, but it's also the right to the fruits of what you own. So here we are talking about a world in which no one need be a slave, because a slave is one who doesn't own himself. Whoever owns the slave owns his body, can control his body, as well as whatever the slave is able to produce. So we're looking at a world which can provide justice, economic justice, social justice, so that every human being should be able to get power and get ownership, but get the means by which having the laws, particularly the laws dealing with money, taxation, inheritance laws, and so on, so that every human being can enjoy that fundamental right, enjoy the power, enjoy the income, and therefore become fully human. And you mentioned before that contrasting. Let's contrast it with what people are today, most people, as a result of robotics, artificial intelligence, and many other very advanced technologies, many of which were developed for war purposes, but it can be used for peace and bringing the world into a world in which, if we think about it, we can, in fact, become a model. We can create a model nations, a model world in which every person in the world would have equal access to becoming owners of the technology needed. And that gets, of course, so capital homesteading, go back to your original point. What is capital homesteading? It's saying that we must have a legal system improved over the existing legal system, which makes it possible for everyone to have the right kind of credit, so that people who have no savings could become owners of new capital. And we can get into detail on that, but basically we're doing it for workers now. We were able to get the laws passed, found some champions in the Congress. You had a president who was very favorable. Ronald Reagan used the term industrial homesteading back in the 70s when he was governor of California. And because he discovered Kelso's ideas, and these are ideas not of mine. These are ideas of other great thinkers where I could, despite whatever studies I had in the law and in economics, I learned from others the meaning of justice, the meaning of economic justice. What does it mean? The meaning of social justice. What do they mean? That's so I found in Kelso and another founder of CSJ answers to these things, so that now we can formulate a vision of specific changes that are needed, and we call that the Capital Homestead Act. And in other countries, because they may not be familiar with homesteading, there are other countries we talk about Economic Empowerment Act or Economic Democracy Act. You could call it that here in this country too, but we want to be able to show that in this country, in addressing the original sin in the formation of America, which was slavery, we not only want to be able to eliminate wage slavery, welfare slavery, charity slavery, consumer debt slavery, and the way to do that is to provide, to overcome slavery and make human beings able to become empowered through ownership. So it's a universal human right. We need to have a system, and that system, as you know, I think on the website at CSJ, you can go into all the fine details. But the important thing is your question is a good one, because it starts by saying, what is capital homesteading? It's a way to bring about economic and social justice in the world without taking property away from the existing owners.
Okay. So yeah, giving you guys a little recap on it. That was awesome. It was a lot of information there, but I really like this topic because capital homesteading, what it's saying is that back in the day with Abraham Lincoln, they had the ability to give out 160 acres of land. The thing is, eventually, land is finite. Like he was saying, you can't exactly give out an infinite supply of land. Eventually, you're going to run out. But what ended up happening is that by giving out that land with the Industrial Revolution, the U.S. actually developed some of the most successful farms, and their economy began just erupting. It skyrocketed. Eventually, Lincoln, as we know, was assassinated when this was going on, and so there wasn't really, as the Industrial Revolution happened, they kind of wanted to take this concept because they saw, hey, if we actually give out a bunch of land for free to these people and they get to use it, become owners of it, it actually does in the long run help us out because it changes the economy. But the thing is, in today's society, in our day and age, we're in more of like a digital revolution, where with social media, everything is online these days. A lot of people just start up companies online, as you know, and have just massive followings. The thing is, there are some things that are infinite today that don't really have limits. One of them would be, as he was saying, could be credit. The thing is with or anything with online capacity, they're not like land anymore where you can only give out a certain amount until you run out. And so that's where kind of this concept was kind of forgotten when Lincoln was assassinated. And it definitely can be used today, but it hasn't been used in its full capacity. And so the next kind of question is I kind of want to just keep going with this, but how would capital homesteading be used today? So we kind of know what it was, where it originated, but now what are we trying to do with capital homesteading today, Norm?
You put your finger on the key to the solution, and that is, what is credit? And then there's a question related to that, because the form of credit is very important. You can get credit to become productive, and credit, and for example, if the robot is going to displace your job, if you own the robot, there's nothing wrong with that, because then you will be able to control the decisions or share in the control of the decisions of what the robot is going to be able to do. Secondly, you're going to get whatever profits are going to be in the enterprise as a result of the robots. But you'll also, to understand what credit is, just a matter of promises. Every contract is a form of credit. Credit should be that, as a matter of fact, what credit is a form of money. And so we got to define what is money. And not just take it for granted that if the Federal Reserve says that today's currency is a form of money, no. Money always should be backed by assets, okay? In other words, if somebody just creates money and there are no assets behind it, it's the equivalent of counterfeiting. Somebody just manufacturing artificially that, and what happens if you have double the amount of the volume of money in the world, but the same level of production? What's going to happen to prices? You see, prices are going to double, exactly. So if we're trying to have stability that comes from justice, we have to now look at what money is and how it's been misused. And as a matter of fact, the kind of credit we're talking about is credit. There are two kinds of credit. And if you go to the Federal Reserve Act, Section 13, you'll see two terms. They talk about mortgages, which is credit to buy things that now exist. In other words, land or home or savings in one form or another. It's past savings. People have not spent, so you have assets that can back that money. That's called mortgages. And then you'll see under something called bills of exchange. Now, that's the key to the future, because what bills of exchange are will be also asset-backed, but when you borrow, let's say, to expand the economy by trillions of dollars for new capital formation, new infrastructure, and all that kind of thing, they don't exist today, but they will exist if money is created, because you can provide credit to citizens generally. That's paid for so that there will be physical assets if the money's there to lubricate the process. And then it will pay for itself out of the future earnings of whatever new kinds of capital that you're adding. So that's called bills of exchange. And the Federal Reserve was supposed to monetize the local banks so that individuals could get credit even for things that don't exist right now, but would exist if you had the money. It's just a lubricant for the process, but it's backed by future savings, not past savings. And this is the key, because the capitalist system is one in which all new capital is financed either by credit or other means, but it's always based on past savings, past accumulation. And that's the reason that ownership, instead of being universal, becomes owned by a fraction of humanity. And of course, everyone else it becomes a virtual slave, a modern form of slave. So you can get the best of education in the finest universities, and they teach you that the reason you go to a university or maybe grad school and all, why? So you get a job. And then it turns out that many forms of jobs that had existed in the past no longer exist. So you're standing there with up to $1 million or more in credit, but you can't pay for it because you're unable to get a job and pay for it. So what we talk about is a world in which you can divide up the economic process. We have to define our terms very clearly so it's realistic. There are only two sweeping categories that go into the production of marketable goods and services. One is people, and the other are things. And they include not only the new technologies, land and resource things I'm talking about, but it also includes the social tools. And incidentally, money is a social tool. When I use the term tool, it just means that it's something that helps people live a better life. It's a social tool. All your institutions are social tools. Money is a social tool. If you think about it that way, then you know that tool ought to be available to everyone. And then there's one social tool that is the source of justice, but it also can be the source of radical injustice. And that's called the state, the government. The government didn't invent people. But the founders of this country said, we the people, in order to form a more perfect union, so you can unite everyone, the next two words are establish justice. So besides and security and so on, they have services that the state, but the unique thing about the state, which makes it really dangerous, is the only institution or social tool that is a natural monopoly. And that, when you hear the word monopoly, you ought to think what that means. It means power. It means the power to coerce, the power to kill, as well as the kinds of services that establish justice and solve problems. But it should not be the source of your economic power. That has to be done by the people. The people have to have the power to produce. The state was never designed as an efficient producer of goods and services for the public. Yeah, Marx tried to do that. You see, if we look at what Marx wrote in Marx and Engels in the Communist Manifesto, 1848, he's looking at the beginning of industrialization in the world around that time, and he's seeing that a few people were owning, and he called them capitalists. The thingists. They were concerned with the things, and they monopolize it. And so Marx was against the monopoly. And then he said in that, you can summarize the entire philosophy of communism, this is in the Communist Manifesto, in a single sentence. Abolish what? You remember what
Slavery.
he said? No, he said
abolish
private property. Private property.
Sorry.
And then he had 10 points on how you do it. And the ownership of everything would be in what he called the dictatorship of the proletariat. You see, the state would be the owner, and no individual could own the means of production. So he was dealing with monopoly capitalism, and he creates something that's even a worse form of monopoly, to have the state the owner rather than the few who we call capitalists. The word capitalist, incidentally, was not invented by free market people. It was invented by Marx and the socialists. So we want to. I don't like to use the term. I never used the term, even though my mentor, Louis Kelso, challenged Marx. He and Mortimer Adler. And they wrote something in 1958 called the Capitalist Manifesto. And he was challenging Marx and said, no, everyone, Marx, you're wrong, everyone should be an owner. Well, I think Kelso used, I can understand the term as a term to challenge Marx, but in any event, the word capitalist is thingist. Because you're talking about, so you don't want to glorify things, but you want the people to own. So that the term is, John Paul II did his dissertation, and he called it personalism. He was for. We met with him back in 1985. We met with him, together with people from Polish Solidarity, but he called it personalism. Now that's the only ism that I don't like feminism. I don't like anything which keeps things confined. But the person, every person is important, and that's why if I were to call something other than the just third way, I would call it economic personalism. So words are important, and it's time for academics to wake up to this, because the academics never talk about the fact that we must have a substitute for capitalism, and all they do is go to the state to redistribute, and that's not an answer. That's conflict. We come up, or Kelso came up with, the idea that everyone must be an owner. And this you'll find there's a growing body of great thinkers who said that. As a matter of fact, many of the founders who were not in favor of slavery said that all citizens should be owners. John Adams, read his material, but there are many others who were in support. Thomas Paine was a supporter, and you'll find that throughout history there are those who did say everyone should be an owner.
This all sounds like going with Thomas Paine's going to be a total dad joke, but common sense.
That's right.
Yeah,
Exactly.
It should be common sense. Where...
I like that. I like that point, because what we're talking about, if it doesn't make sense, in the 50 years since I first heard of these ideas, it's been over 50 years, and I must say I have not found anyone who's offered a reason that makes it bad. As a matter of fact, I find people from, I've talked to communists, I've talked to libertarians, and I've been able to talk to them and even convince them that that the just third way is a solution for the economic problems. And the economic problems are the reasons that we have war. If you really want to get to war and conflict, you'll find that there are always going to be economic reasons. I even think that these people who become suicide terrorists, who will strap bombs around themselves and kill innocent people, what we have to do is convince them that there's a new world that can be created, which is consistent with the writings of all the religious prophets and all your religions. Do not oppose the idea of property. Mm-hmm. And many of them, as a matter of fact, in Islam, they were providing, or they believed that banking should be interest-free credit. Now, that doesn't mean they're doing it. We've had some experience in Egypt and other places where we were able to change the laws in Egypt so that workers would be able to own on credit, and we actually applied it with, it was called Alexandria Tire Company, which is the largest and most advanced tire company in the Middle East.
Oh, wow. So I think that's where I want to go next is, so how do we do this? How is it done today?
Oh, how is it done? We're under present law?
Yeah, so how is it done?
It is being done under present law only for workers in the private sector, under what Kelso and I were able to get support for what was called ESOPs, or employee stock ownership plans. Okay. And there are thousands of companies. There's probably close to 10 million American workers who are benefiting. The UK has ESOP laws. South Africa, there are other, but they're not really yet Kelsonian in the way they're financing it. In this country, you can finance capital with companies that never pay any corporate tax, because all the profits belong to the workers through what's called an employee stock ownership trust. And banks like to do it because we've been able to buy out companies 100% without the workers or management putting up a penny. All done on bank credit. And it's repaid with a full stream of future profits. And then it becomes, after you pay for the shares in a few years, then you start getting dividends. And so every employee can begin getting a second income over and above the wage system, which is a very flawed system, the wage slave system.
So what is it like? So can someone just go into a bank? Like I heard you were saying the Federal Reserve is going to work more with local banks. So what happens? Like if I wanted to do this today, like, wow, this sounds awesome. Like I can basically double my productivity in my company, help all my employees out so they get more bang for their buck. But how does it work? Like, so can I just go into a bank and be like, hey, I want to do an ESOP? And they'll do it for me, or what do I need to do?
You have to present a plan to show that if they give you the money, you're going to have customers for what you have, and you're going to be able to compete in the world against others who are producing for customers. But if you have a talented group that is you and other managers have the experience, so you can convince the bank that this is going to be a good loan. But if, let's say, you're just an amateur, you're going in there and say, I like the money, well, they're not going to give you the money. That's all there is to it. If under today's law, under capital homesteading, that's another matter. But I'm talking now about the existing laws for employee stock ownership plans, which means it does not include children, does not include women, it does not include workers or the disabled, it does not include war vets, it doesn't include government workers, which their pensions are now bankrupting cities. It's bankrupting states like Illinois. And then what about the nonprofits? If you work for, well, no, you're not going to get it that way. So we're looking. That's where the Capital Homestead Act would enable you then to get some money to buy shares of viable companies, not any company. It would be companies that show that if they had the money, they'd be able to be competitive in the marketplace. So it's not for I wish I could do something. You'd go in as the workers of existing companies with management go in. They show the bank, here's what our future profits will be if we get the loan to buy out the shares from a company. One was a client of ours. We created it. It's called Mid-South Building Supply. It sells building materials throughout the state of Virginia and Maryland and Pennsylvania and in any event, in 1985 we did this. It was the first 100% leveraged buyout for all the workers, not just a handful or management. No, all the workers. Nobody put up a penny. And today that company has 4 times the number of employees.
Wow.
It's called Mid-South Building Supply in Springfield, Virginia, and it's noted by the ESOP Association of America, which includes most of the ESOPs in this country, as one of the finest. They're considered a leader, and they always win prizes by the ESOP Association. But in any event, 15 of the workers have accumulated over $1 million.
Wow.
Okay, and it's doing very well, despite the fact that the industry in general is not good. America is not growing. But they're doing well enough, and the shares of stock are 5 times what they originally were when they were bought. The value of the shares.
Wow. So that's awesome right there. Another thing I was trying to figure out. So I'm just trying to help them understand, or kind of like maybe give some questions that maybe you guys have in this moment. So you said 100% buyout. Does that mean you guys go in and get the money to buy out the company, or
they went to the bank that was basically handling their business. It was Equitable Bank of Baltimore, and so they went in. You had an appraiser who from the outside to determine the value of the shares. The shares were owned by a husband and wife. The husband, although he started from very poor background, he became one of the largest landowners in the Washington, D.C. area, Norman Rales.
Wow.
His sons, 2 of his sons, own Craftsman Tools. So they're both billionaires, the sons.
Oh, wow.
So he sold. We had an independent appraiser come in to determine what's the value of the shares. And so the bank made a loan so we could pay him. and there were benefits to him because he can convert the money he got into a diversified portfolio and didn't have to pay taxes until he sold things out of the diversified portfolio. So it was very good for him, and so suddenly where he owned 100%, now he owns 0. Because he sold it. Now, the company owned it, but the ESOP owned it.
Okay, so he got to basically cash out. So you guys bought all his shares, but at the same time, then you created new shares and divvied those up.
No, same shares.
Oh, okay.
No, the original shares.
Oh, okay. So they're the original. So you buy his, but then you divvy it out, and there's
and then as you pay off the loan, you don't divvy it out. It first becomes held by a trust, a tax-exempt trust.
Got it.
Okay, but as you pay off the shares, I forget how many years it took, but let's say it's 10 years, then 1/10 of those shares would be distributed, allocated to the accounts of everyone from the CEO to the janitor.
Oh, okay. And so do you just usually do it like that, just a tenth of the shares, or do you do it just a tenth of the shares, or do you do
No, I'm saying whatever the loan is,
okay.
It's the bank says we'll give you a loan for 10 years.
And then you figure out how much of the shares that's worth, then you...
Yeah, you first figure out how much the shares are worth.
Got it.
And then you purchase all of them with the bank's loan. So this is capital credit. Repayable, not with past savings, but with future savings, the future profits.
Got it.
So out of those future profits, each year you would, let's say, pay off 1/10 of the loan or 1/5 of the loan, depending how much you're earning, how much those profits are going to be. And then out of the future profits, let's say it's 1/10, then 10%, if you had 1,000 shares, then 100 shares would be allocated to each one's account, allocated, and then that automatically gives the employee property. Now, there's another issue that I haven't yet gotten to, and that is, what are the rights of the workers under these? And I'm very critical of most ESOPs. That's why we're talking about Capital Homestead Act. But there are good ones. And the good ones, what they find, that if in fact there's governance rights, that the workers have participation. In other words, there's some that you'll get shares, but the shares are controlled, the voting is controlled by a handful of people. You see?
Yeah.
And so the ordinary worker has no voice. But the ones that give them a voice and give them an opportunity to participate as human beings and giving their ideas, etc. And it's open. You have new kind of leadership. If they do that, that's one thing that will make them different than the ESOPs that don't provide people with power. And second is a right to share in getting that additional profits over and above what's necessary to buy the shares as income. So now the workers are lifted out of the wage-slave system where their gains in the future are going to come not out of wages, but out of the bottom line, out of profits. And that makes a entirely different, and they find by comparing companies in the same industry, those who have the more ideal ESOP, and we want to even improve on that. We have an approach, but it's still, if they get power, a share in the power, and also share in the profits over and above the profits necessary to become owners, they're more successful, significantly more successful than competitors in the same industry.
This is a very interesting concept, guys. So basically what happens is let's imagine like a CEO or anyone in the high corporate level, we're not talking about their salary. So that's completely separate. at the end of the day, they're still going to be receiving their same amount of pay. We're talking about their stocks.
Their labor pay. Yeah, the pay from their labor will be set more by the market.
Yeah.
But here, as you accumulate more and more productive capital and get the earnings from that, and it becomes a supplement to your income from other sources, it's a different ball game.
Yeah. So what's happening is, by using this method, you create a way where your company becomes a lot more team oriented.
Right.
The reason why that company he was explaining went up a lot, their shares are worth, at least, I think he said 5 times
the
amount.
The value of the shares are about 5 times.
And the reason that is because their productivity went through the roof. Because what happens is, when you start creating a system like this where every employee is a part owner, and what happens is employees start holding each other more accountable. You have more trust in the companies. Obviously, in any company you go to, you're always going to encounter maybe sometimes people do fishy stuff or something doesn't go right, because we're all human, we make mistakes. But at the same time, people are going to be holding each other more accountable because it's more team-based. If you're really making a ton of sales, at the end of the day, you're helping a lot of people out in the company because you're making the company better, worth more money, and so those shares of stock, the productivity level, benefits everyone in the long run.
Yeah, you've made several interesting points. One is, why did we have a Rust Belt? Why did American industry in the world shift from being a net exporter to a net importer? Okay, very important. Why did the states like Michigan, where I'm being invited now to Wayne County, where Detroit is, come in and talk about capital homesteading? Why did they fail? Why were they having problems? You have to go back into the 60s and 70s. And one of the leaders of the United Auto Workers, one of the great leaders, was Walter Reuther. Now, Reuther, I remember bringing Kelso to. I was working with what was then, when I quit the government, I went to work for the Citizens Crusade Against Poverty. And it was funded by the United Auto Workers, basically, but they had all the big industrial unions, the steel workers, and other major unions involved, and they had a lot of the liberal establishment was there. It was and I brought because of the work that I had done earlier, we brought grassroots leaders from Mississippi, Ohio, all over the country into a meeting. I arranged for Kelso to give a talk. And the liberals didn't like it, but the grassroots people did like it. He just said, why don't you just study this idea as an alternative to the welfare state and redistribute, making people dependent on the government to redistribute income. And it was a good talk. And Reuther must have listened very carefully, because before that, the way that the auto workers got increases was to go on strike and demand, saying we're going to quit, stop production for the major auto companies unless you give us 10% or whatever increase. So we were locked into the wage system, and they were just increasing costs. And meantime, Japan, you could hire 3 times the number of workers that a single American worker would be paid. So the cost of labor went up. Well, what happens to prices? They go up too. In Japan, after the Second World War, we're given the opportunity to move from a country that had a reputation of producing junk. I was there in 1954 to 56, and it was right after the Second World War. And so I saw these things, and then Japan, they brought in Deming to teach quality circles, get the workers together and where they can propose things to management. And they were very creative. In the meantime, they had less costs, but they had to import all their oil and anything else. They imported many things, but they were able to produce cars that could be sold in America. They did. America allowed Japan to sell whatever they could produce because they thought, the American people thought, that Japan produced junk. But here comes Japan, being able to produce cars that keep getting better and better, while the American cars were not that good. But Japan was able to come in and locate plants in the United States, and the workers in the American auto were losing jobs. They didn't need them. So that you had a decline in work in the U.S. companies that were in the manufacturing area, and the unions used to have about 30% of the workers in manufacturing as members of the union, and suddenly now they're less than 6%. So there's been the unions were in bad shape. But anyway, Reuther listened. He must have caught on to what Kelso said, and in 1968. He testified before the Joint Economic Committee of Congress, and he said, if you democratize the future ownership of industry so that the workers would be able to share in the profits, it would not. That would be a way of increasing their income without increasing costs, because all your labor costs and other costs are there before you sell whatever goods or services into the market. Profits are after all those costs. So if you get your gains from profits, it won't be inflationary. It will not cause your whatever you produce. You might even be able to produce it cheaper than before. You see? But anyway, he died in an airplane crash in 1970. Now, you see, if we could wake up the auto workers and other industrial workers and say, look, you guys, you got to get out of this thing they call the labor unions. Call them ownership unions and go organize all the citizens who are not owners. You know, you're talking about most of your citizens. And begin to get behind the Capital Homestead Act, because that will benefit all citizens. Not just, so if you can benefit Americans who are non-owners and show them how they can get some economic power and income, even in the age of the robot, then everybody's going to want to join the ownership union, and they can negotiate and protect the owners just as they protect the workers, or they intended to, but they didn't protect the workers. They created the losses for the workers. They lost members, and so we're going to need people who can organize. Well, the unions know how to organize, but for the wrong thing. Now we can get them to organize for justice. And that's what we're talking about when we propose the Capital Homestead Act. All
right, guys. So I think we're out of time for today, but make sure to tune in next week. I'm just going to finish off with this. One of the main phrases that CESJ uses, the Center of Economic and Social Justice, is own or be owned. What that phrase means is that you really have two options. You can either become an owner, or you're going to be owned and be locked into this kind of cycle we have now where you're working nonstop, but you don't really have any power. You don't really have any say. And a lot of people are stuck in a system where people at the lower tier, they're kind of losing hope and faith in the whole system we have now. And so own or be owned means that there is a way for everyone to actually have that right. And it actually was a right, as we were saying with we the people. And I think we're hearing that circulated a lot more in the news, where in the end, government, the real power is actually with the people. It's not with government, where you're not supposed to be a welfare slave, as he was saying, where you're really, there's so many government programs that people are just depending on. And if a system like this were to go and play, what it would really do, it would create more effective businesses, increase their productivity, while at the same time eliminating some of the needs for those. And in the end, that would actually help tackle the national debt, which is one of the things that really interested me about CESJ, how the national debt's becoming such a big problem that we're kind of almost just pushing it to the side, you know? People don't even want to talk about it or even bring about solutions, really, because it's like, oh, we're done for. Make sure to hit up cesj.org for more information on what we've talked about today. There's a lot of information on there. One of my favorite sections is where their archives is, the archive library. You can look at a lot of different talks, articles that have been written by Norm and his team, and as well as interviews and videos as well. There's so much information on there. Also, you can send Norm a direct email if you would, or get in contact with him at Third Way. So you're going to spell out the word THIRDWAY at cesj.org, or you can message them on Facebook or Instagram. Both are going to be cesj.org. On Instagram, it's _.
You might mention the Unite America Party.
Oh yeah, or you can
UniteAmericaParty.org.
Yeah, also UniteAmericaParty.org is another useful site they have as well. But yeah, feel free to message Norm if you have any questions. Go on the site. You can get in contact with us. And thanks again for tuning in. We hope you guys have a great day. And just remember to keep trucking along. And there's
Own or be owned.
Own or be owned, as Norm says. Hope you guys have a great day. See ya.
That was very good.